It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Alison McBain. Hi, Alison. How are you? Welcome back.
Great. Thanks so much for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. We looked it up. You were here in May of 2024, so almost a year ago, short of a month or so. At that time, I believe you were promoting your Author versus AI book. Was that correct?
Yeah, so my Author versus AI project was where I was writing a book a week for about a year. I stopped a little bit early, though. I got a bit tired.
Well, let's review that, because I think that's a great topic anyways. And then I know you've got a new book to promote called The New Empire, which we will get to. Tell me again about that Author versus AI, what you were doing with that.
Yeah, definitely. I was just, it was something, AI is something that is on everyone's mind right now and was a year ago also. And so one thing that I wanted to do was, first of all, start the conversation about what AI means to creatives in all genres, for writers, artists, musicians, but also to show that it's not the big bad. It's not something super scary that will get rid of our jobs as creatives, but something that we can actually, sort of have a workaround. We can write almost as fast as AI, but hopefully much, much better.
Well, I agree with you in certain areas, but I'm particularly partial to music because I am a musician. And we may have covered this in the previous interview, but, technology, this was even long before AI, has been encroaching on music for a long time. And it depends how far back you want to go. I mean, there were people in the 1920s who were jazz musicians, for example, who hated the idea of recorded music when they first started to be able to record music, because they said, no, the only way to hear music is live, because once you record it, then people can copy you. And so they were opposed to recorded music until it was discovered that you could make a lot more money just by making a record and then selling the record, as opposed to having to go tour, and perform for people in person, and that's the only way you got paid. So then, of course, publishers got involved, songwriting, all of that. And then in the 50s, Les Paul also had controversy because he figured out how to do multi-tracking, and people thought that it was cheating, where he could do, 20 different guitar parts and put them all together on one track, mix them down. And then the Beatles took it to the next level, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward, when I was in New York in the early 80s, I was playing in a band in local clubs around New York City. And the karaoke machine was just making its way into the scene. And we were very upset by it because a lot of club owners wouldn't hire live bands anymore because it was cheaper to put in a karaoke machine and just let their drinking patrons get up and make fools of themselves. So now AI is pretty much able to create music all by itself. The noise that you hear isn't really done by a live human being. It's done by a machine, the sounds that you hear. And, I don't know. I think there's real potential for that to eliminate the need for real musicians. Now, I've read AI-created script, books, whatever, and it's definitely not as good. Okay, it's not there yet to what humans can create. But the AI music is a lot closer to being human comparable than written. I don't know, maybe written language is more difficult for computers to comprehend and do it properly. I don't know. What do you think?
I've heard artists say the same thing. They're worried about AI encroaching because AI can produce some really stunning visuals. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. However, I see it sort of as the idea of like restaurants, for example. People still go out to eat. Granted, there are boom and bust cycles. If the economy is doing badly, restaurants don't fare as well. During the pandemic, restaurants struggled a lot. But restaurants, even though we can get a frozen dinner from the grocery store, it's not going to replace restaurants. The quality going out, the experience. So while there might not be as many opportunities as you pointed out, and especially for writers, for my career, there are people who are using AI, for example, in scripts, as you pointed out. So it is narrowing some of those opportunities, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to eliminate it, because people want entertainment that is not cookie cutter. People want entertainment that is human, I would say. And so while AI might fill in some of those cheaper gaps, and companies might use it to save a buck at some point, there has been a lot of human pushback. There's been a lot of, for example, in my sphere, publishers that are saying no AI writing, we want human writing. Doesn't matter if it's free or if it's cheaper, we want the experience of creativity. So I think there is not only going to continue to be that pushback, but people will get tired of, as I mentioned, AI art might be visually stunning, but you can still tell it's almost shiny.
That's a good way to describe it.
It looks fake, right?
Particularly,
Yes.
although less fake with inanimate things, but with human beings, you can definitely tell.
Yes.
Like, for example, Narnia. I mean, Aslan looked pretty good, looked pretty real as the lion. But I've seen other AI where human beings were created, and you're right, they were too shiny. Their skin was too perfect. They were, it just didn't look quite human, quite real.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
what's the good side then of AI for authors?
AI can be a useful tool as a shortcut. So some things that authors I've talked to have used it for is, for example, if you're sending out your book to agents or publishers, you need a summary of your book. So I've heard authors who have plugged in their entire book into AI and asked for summary, and that's a lot, I would say, easier and faster than struggling over it yourself. Granted, they've had to make adjustments to the summary that AI pops out, but it's something that doesn't necessarily need as much of a human touch as writing the book itself. Doing website work, doing marketing. So the things that are sort of cookie cutter are ones where AI excels and can be a time saver.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because we actually tried that with the show. There was a company that offered us a free trial, and we said, okay. And basically what we did was we sent them our YouTube video of the interview, and it created a summary, the show notes, a tagline, and there's another term that I'm missing here in my head, but a description of the show. Okay, it would write 3 or 4 lines after the AI watched the show. And some of it was interesting, but we always had to correct it, because it would write everything in third person, which didn't always read comfortably. It would say things like, and then the host said. Now, nobody would write that for their own show. Do you know what I mean? So we always had to go back and fix things. And then after the free trial, we just said, no, I don't want to use this thing. It's faster just to write it ourselves. But yeah, okay. Well, I see your point. There is good and bad. I don't know that I would ever use it for anything that I'm doing, but...
Well, I'm definitely not a proponent of AI
Okay.
at all.
All right.
My whole project was to show that we don't need AI.
Yeah, we don't need it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't need it. But yeah, I wouldn't use it for any of my creative projects at all. But again, some creatives have found it helpful to save on time. So it can, maybe in future iterations, it will be helpful.
I mean, I think it's helpful, as I see it now, it's helpful for language translation to a certain degree.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen some of these handheld deals where you can speak in one language and it'll speak out in a different language. Whether how accurate it is depends on the person at the other end, I suppose. In other words, if you had somebody speaking in English and it came out in French, and the person on the other side was a native French speaker, they might laugh or say, "Oh, that's not quite right," or "You're supposed to say it this way." But you know, it's better than nothing if you're trying to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak your language. The other part I like is spell check, because I'm terrible at spelling. So spell check works real well when I'm writing emails. I've never been a good speller, especially in English, because English is like one of the worst languages to try to figure out for spelling. We don't spell things. It's not phonetic in English.
No,
you know?
not at all.
Spanish is much easier because it's phonetic, but English is it's a nightmare. So, anyways, let's pivot over to your new book. So your new book is called The New Empire, and this has nothing to do with AI from the description I'm reading.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's an alternate history book.
Okay. How come do you jump around? I mean, do you write in all different genres? Because a lot of authors don't do that. They stick with one.
Oh, I definitely do. I write everything from nonfiction essays all the way to mystery, thriller, adventure, science fiction, fantasy, history. Yeah, I think a good story is a good story no matter what genre, and I get inspired by everything, I would say.
Well, I think that's great. I think that, you know, to me, I'll equate it to going to the gym and only using one machine all the time.
Exactly.
If you go to the gym and you use all the machines, you know, not to say that I'm not knocking people who only write in one genre. If they find their niche, great. But I think for the exercise of the creative brain, it might be better to try writing in different styles and different genres. And I had one author on who said that she wrote her first book in first person, and that was a real creative challenge for her in a good way. Apparently the book did really well, so she says, now I'm going to have to write another one in first person, where she always wrote in third person previously. Yeah. So, well, give us a synopsis of The New Empire.
Sure. Essentially, it goes back in history and asks a what-if question. And the what-if question is, what if the Chinese came over to the Americas earlier than the Europeans and actually established permanent trading colonies with the indigenous populations? How would that change history? And the way that I took it was that it would create a confederacy of the indigenous populations and make them a superpower that would be on an equal footing with the other superpowers at the time. So when the Europeans came over, the Spanish, the English, they're able to really stop their expansion and be on an equal playing field with them.
It's an interesting premise. When did this book come out? I can't help but think we talked about it already.
We did talk about it a bit. It came out a couple years ago. I should remember the actual date, 2022.
Okay, because this conversation sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay. It doesn't matter, because actually you were on the video show the last time, and that's a different audience. So they probably, this one will go out to all the podcast channels. So this will be a new conversation for probably most of them.
Sure.
So it doesn't, and plus it's a really interesting premise, so I wouldn't mind covering it again. Okay, well, what I would suggest is that if you look anthropologically, the indigenous populations of North America, South America, Central America are originally from Asia, like 5,000 years ago. They crossed over the land bridge when it was frozen at the end of the last ice age. So if the Chinese came, 4,000 years later, there would be a kinship between those people simply based on genetics. Now, over those 4,000 some odd years, they created their own tribes, their own cultures, which probably had nothing to do with China by then, because 4,000 some odd years had gone by. I don't know if that would make any difference or not. What do you think?
I think it might have been a larger timeline for when the populations came over. Again, it's something that historians argue over. So I'm not one to knock whatever theory is out there about the establishment of populations in the Americas. But I don't know. So when my book actually has the Mutsun tribe, the Amamutsun, as slaveholders. So they see the Chinese that are being sent over as more like property, because it's based sort of on the fact when there was a coup or a changeover of power in China, in real history, mostly they would just kill everybody who opposed them. So my book has them taking those opposing populations and instead sending them as a labor force to the Americas. So they provide sort of the economic background, sort of as how the Europeans used African slavery as their sort of economic background to build up their colonies and then country.
Yeah, and what's going on in Africa now, where it used to be former European, British colonies, French, Dutch, the Chinese have moved in there. And I don't know that the living conditions are much different than when the British and the French were there. Now, I haven't been there to see it myself. It's only what I've read. But that the Chinese are as exploitive of the native populations as the British and the French were.
There's definitely echoes of colonialism that are still impacting a lot of African nations, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And those are definitely long-lasting and problematic for their current regimes, current populations, which is very unfortunate.
I guess the other question that we touched on before was, what if nobody had come? So the indigenous people that were here for, well, I read it 5,000 years, but it could have been 10,000 years ago. It was whenever at the end of the last ice age, because allegedly they walked over between that gap between Russia and Alaska. It would have been frozen solid, so they could have walked. First of all,
the Bering Strait.
Yeah, the Bering Strait. First of all, imagine walking that far in minus 100 degrees, whatever it was at the time, and all they had were basically animal skins and fire to keep them warm. I mean, it's amazing they made it at all. But suppose nobody else came, what would the Americas look like? Be interesting.
That's a good question, and maybe that is a future book.
Okay. Well, good. If you do that one, you can come on the show and plug it. All right. I'll make you a deal. All right. Well, I think on that we're going to wrap this up. So both books are out, right? The Author versus AI and The New Empire.
The Author versus AI, actually those were books written. So my goal for that project was 52 books going for a full year.
Oh, that's
and I
right.
did manage to do 34 books.
Okay. Are you going to get to the rest of them or no?
I will eventually. I did take a break. I don't like to use the phrase burned out, but I was pretty tired after writing 34 books in 34 weeks. And so I took a bit of a break, and now I'm getting back to them. So those are all unpublished, but I'm working with agent publishers to get those out there.
Were these full-length books? I mean, like 80,000 words or so?
Well, I went by the definition of a book of a novel being 40,000 words and above. So many of them were sort of on the shorter side, 42, 43,000 words, which is a lot for a week.
Still a lot for 1 week, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But most of them, I'll go through edits. I'll expand a number of the stories. I do have some publishers interested in them as novellas. Novellas are definitely popular for readers because they're shorter. You can go through a lot of them. They make good audiobooks, But yeah, most of them will probably be expanded before publication.
Is that the only difference between a novel and a novella, is the actual length of the book?
That's part of it. You also, for a novella, you can't go through as many twists and turns. So they're generally, I won't say simpler stories, but yeah, they don't dive as deep as novels, but they can still be really fun. They can still be really impactful.
All right. Well, Alison, I think I'll let you go. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I do. Anyone who would like to chat with me or see what I'm up to can go to my website, AlisonMcBain.com. That's Alison with one L.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you again, and best of luck with everything you're doing.
Great. Thanks so much for having me on again. Nice to talk to you.